Buenos días. Continuamos con las ponencias de la mañana y la siguiente ponencia a cargo de doña Elizabeth Road, que lleva por título Presencia en el tiempo, Presence in Time, inglés. Elizabeth Road es presidente de la Academia Internacional de Heraldic. Ocupó el cargo de Lord Clerk and Keeper of the Records en la corte de Lord Lyon durante más de 30 años y fue uno de los cronistas de armas de la reina Isabel de 1992 a 2021. Ocupa el cargo de secretario de la muy antigua y muy noble Orden de Cardo. Escribe artículos y da charlas sobre una amplia variedad de temas heráldicos. When you want.
Gracias. Muchas gracias. Buenos días. I am very pleased to be here and to thank the Association for their kindness in allowing me to come again to this wonderful conference. It is also lovely to sit in the sunshine with a glass of beer and to be told that it is raining at home. In this talk, I'm going to discuss 3 Scottish families with ultimately very different lives today, but which all had a very similar beginning. The ownership of land is central to the lives of these 3 families, with the original holdings still being in the hands of the descendants to whom the lands were granted many centuries ago. One family admittedly did sell the lands, but they were reacquired back by a descendant in the late 20th century, and that is a family that is very distinctive between being Scottish and Spanish. It is said by some, especially, dare I say it, by the present Scottish government, that land should not be held in great amounts by one person, and preferably should be held by the community. In some cases, that may be fair comment, but it is forgotten often that, particularly in Scotland, much land is not commercially viable, and it is only because there is income from the better parts of the land that the poorer land is maintained. The barony of Duntreth is in the county of Stirling, 12 miles north of Glasgow. It consists of some 2,400 hectares. It lies about 10 miles south of where I live, and it is therefore both a place and a family I know well. Estates of this size now have difficulty in bringing in sufficient income to maintain the large houses and gardens, and thus, like many others, the present generation of Edmonstons have diversified the house and gardens into becoming a wedding venue and offering corporate entertainment. In 1425, Sir William Edmonston of Culloden, a cadet of the principal Edmonston family, married Mary, the daughter of King Robert III, by whom he had a son, William, and the family of Duntreth thus has as its ancestress a royal daughter. Royalty runs through the 3 families. By 1434, the lands of Duntreth had been bestowed on the said William. There have been many charters since relating to these lands, which have been held by William and Mary's descendants until the present day. The present laird, Sir Archibald Edmonston of Duntreth, still owns and manages those core lands. They have been added to by successive generations as Edmonstons have either inherited or bought adjoining properties. Mary and her husband are both buried at Strathblane, a little settlement close to Duntreth, where the family mausoleum, which you see here, stands, and if you look hard, you can just see the arms above the arch. Very recently, however, Sir Archie decided he did not wish to be buried with his ancestors in this mausoleum, and some land at Duntreth has been consecrated so that he can be buried there and, as he says, remind his descendants that he is still watching over them. This slide shows a birth brief for Archibald Edmonston of Duntreth, who died in Ireland in 1688. He is also buried at the mausoleum at Strathblane. He was the grandfather of the first baronet. It takes his ancestry back to his great-great-grandfather, but it would appear that there is an error in the first generation, given that, Sir James, the second generation from the left, did marry a member of the family of Stirling of Keir, another local family. But the father, Sir William, is also shown as marrying a daughter of that family. But according to other genealogies, he married twice, and his first wife was Lady Agnes Stuart, a great-granddaughter of King James II. It just shows how genealogies can get things wrong, even when you have such a notable ancestress as a royal granddaughter. While the Edmonstons were clearly a family of significance, as, for instance, they sat on the Privy Council where matters of governance were determined, they were not members of the aristocracy. They did, however, make very significant alliances and appear in the best of pedigrees. This memorial to John, 1st Marquess of Atholl in Dunkeld Cathedral, gives the descent of him and his wife, with his Ses Cartier being on the left. You will notice the arms of Edmonston of Duntreth on the 5th row down. It is not uncommon, particularly in Scotland where the population is small, for some of the oldest families connected with the running of the country to be granted no titles, but to be regarded as a very distinguished family. Separation between duke and commoner is not very great in my small country. This is one of the families with the very best of descents, royal ancestry and important cousins, but one on which no honours or titles were conferred until 1774, when Sir William, the 11th holder of the lands and a member of Parliament, was granted a baronetcy. We heard about baronetcies yesterday, and although this badge shows the Red Hand of Ulster, it is the only badge applicable to baronets other than those of Nova Scotia. In fact, the badge only came into being because the other baronets were so angry that the baronets of Nova Scotia were given a badge in 1625, and they didn't get one until the 20th century. Sir William was a great benefactor to his family by improving the property and acquiring more, and he lived to the very great age then, in the late 18th century, of 89. His grandson, the 4th baronet, had 11 children, the youngest of whom was Alice, wife of Colonel George Keppel and great-grandmother of Queen Camilla. Thus, the current baronet and the Queen are second cousins. As mentioned above, such connections were by no means uncommon in Scotland, and even less so today. A family with a long history, closely connected in a discreet way to political events in Scotland. Because they have kept a relatively low profile, but have made useful marriages, they have been able to hold their lands for 600 years without interruption, although they have no great monetary wealth. I am pleased to say that there are descendants who will continue to live at Duntreth. As the main line of Edmonston of that ilk is understood to expired in 1772, the Duntreth family is now senior Edmonston line, although Sir Archie does not claim to be chief of the name. We heard also about clan chiefs yesterday. I now turn to a very, very different family, which has acquired great honours and great wealth, but which is still very firmly tied to the lands acquired centuries ago. The Scots of Buccleuch have been at the centre of Scottish history since very early times. They were and remain a powerful family located mainly on the border between England and Scotland, where in the days of endless raids and feuds between the two countries, the balance of power, if power it was, particularly in the eastern end of the border, was very much in the hands of the Scots. The genealogy is long, but as my forebear, Sir Ian Moncrieff of that ilk said, no one has more ancestors than anyone else. It is just that some are better known than others. The first clear progenitor of the Scots of Buccleuch lived in 1116, when there was a person of the name living on lands in the borders. At the end of the 13th century, Sir Richard le Scott, like most other Scots from all parts of the country except the far north, signed a document called the Ragman Roll. Landowners were required by the conquering English king to swear allegiance or lose their lands, so many did so under duress. In about 1440, Sir Walter Scott of Kirkcaldy exchanged some of his lands for those at Branksome Castle, and the present castle incorporates the original tower built as a fortress to guard the border between Scotland and England in the 15th century. With increased land holdings came military strength being that you could put more men in the field than your neighbour, and the Scots began to raid across the border into England, mostly very successfully and mostly for cattle. From then on, there were charters confirming descendants in these lands. Much of the castle was destroyed in the border wars of 1570 and rebuilt later that century with more recent additions. And you can see in the left the tower, which then appears in the middle photograph at the far right. Another landed family in this part of Scotland was that of Douglas, and it appears that Sir Walter was at the forefront of suppressing this rival family. Another neighbouring family was that of Carr, and again, more wars. In later generations, however, these enmities turned into alliances with marriages to daughters of both families. And on the right, you can see two stones, the shield on the extreme right being that of a Douglas wife, and the wife of the present Duke was a Carr. Sir Walter, or Wat as he was known, appears as Scott of Buccleuch as a witness to a charter in 1442, and that name, Buccleuch, has remained the principal designation of the family for nearly 700 years. The name Buccleuch is said to derive from the rescue of the king by a member of the Scott family when the king was faced by an aggressive stag or buck from a deep ravine or clwch, clwch. The main branches of this family are descended from the younger sons of the head of the family during the 14th and 15th centuries. Some of these descendants have left stories which live on, such as that of Bold Buccleuch, who was born in 1566 and made a daring raid on the English fortress of Carlisle to rescue somebody known as Kinmont Willie Armstrong, and the story is still told today when Armstrongs meet. Of course, more recently, the author of many great novels and histories was Sir Walter Scott of Abbotsford. It is said that the ruined tower on the left of Smailholm is what inspired Sir Walter to explore the ballads and stories of the frontier, and indeed to build Abbotsford. In 1606, Bold Buccleuch, who participated in all the frontier raids of his time and was a distinct thorn in the flesh of the English, was created Lord Scott of Buccleuch, with a remainder or destination to his heirs male. That was in 1611. He was also a privy councillor, one of the people governing Scotland, and a real case of poacher turned gamekeeper. This was the first of many titles acquired by members of this family. His son was created Earl of Buccleuch, Lord Scott of Winchester and Eskdale in 1619, again with a destination to his heirs male. The destination is such that it is very unlikely that those titles will ever die out, because it means that you go back up the line before the first peer to find an heir, and it is most likely in a large family like the Scotts that there will be an heir. And this slide shows how the arms have slightly changed over the time. The first one, the star, is at the top of the bend, nowadays more commonly in the middle, but we'll see more variations of their arms. This is also one of the relatively few families where a great title has been created in favour of a woman. In 1650, the 7th Earl of Buccleuch arranged for his honours and estates, failing sons, to pass to the heirs female of his sister Jean. In the event, he had 3 daughters, 2 of whom survived to adulthood, almost. He was therefore succeeded firstly by his eldest daughter, Mary, who became Countess of Buccleuch in her own right. One of the conditions of the 1650 arrangement was that the husband of an heir female must either already bear the surname Scott or assume it, otherwise the estates would be forfeited. Now, to lose these great estates meant that no man would have had much difficulty in changing his name to Scott. Mary's mother arranged for her, then aged 11, to marry a kinsman, a Scot. But sadly, she did not live long, dying when she was 14 without issue. Her younger surviving sister, Anne, born in 1651, was now Scotland's greatest heiress. She was married in 1663, when aged 12, to James, Duke of Monmouth, illegitimate son of King Charles II. He had already taken the surname Scott. It was worth it to inherit the lands. And on the day of his marriage, he was created Duke of Buccleuch, Earl of Dalkeith, and Lord Scott of Winchester and Eskdale. Subsequently, these titles were conferred again on Anne, with the title Duchess of Buccleuch, Countess of Dalkeith, and Countess of Buccleuch in her own right. She is known throughout history as Duchess Anne. After the death of King Charles II, the Duke, Monmouth, attempted to take the throne. It was a ploy which failed. Unless he was illegitimate, it was never going to succeed. He was executed on the 15th of July, 1685. The right of her children, however, was not affected by their father's unfortunate exercise. And on Duchess Anne's death, aged 81, in 1732, she was succeeded by her grandson Francis. This was the first of the family to become a Knight of the Thistle, and he was restored and the titles granted to his grandfather, the Duke of Monmouth. He married Jane Douglas, daughter of the 2nd Duke of Queensberry, and eventually that title too came to the Buccleuchs. The family has, over a long period, acquired great estates and great wealth. It is of a philanthropic nature, with successive dukes believing in service and practical aid. This attitude included funding the entire cost of building a new harbour in Edinburgh in 1838. Thanks to this generosity, the 5th Duke was granted the title of Proprietor of Granton Harbour and a special coat of arms. In its heyday, it was a commercial harbour. Today, it is a sailing club. Bow Hill House on the left, just on the borders near Hawick. Drumlanrig Castle, top right, in Dumfriesshire, in the western borders, and Dalkeith Palace, bottom right, just south of Edinburgh, are home to the family's magnificent art collection, which has been expanded over successive generations. And I can tell you, each of these houses is full to the brim of beautiful objects. The family also owns Boughton House in England, and these houses are all still occupied by the family at various times throughout the year, and they are home to these wonderful pieces of furniture, marvellous portraits, china, glass. Each duke since the 2nd has been a Knight of the Thistle, Two have also been Knights of the Order of the Garter. The current Duke, his father, grandfather, great-grandfather, and great-great-grandfather all have stall plates in the chapel of the order. It was not built until the beginning of the 20th century, so the earlier ones do not. Here you see how very different the arms have been used. The first two dukes only used the Scot element. The next duke used a more complicated version of the arms. The last late duke, who was Chancellor of the Order of the Thistle, used a different coat of arms again, and the present Duke, Duke Richard, who is also Chancellor of the Order of the Thistle now, wanted to have the most complicated of all the coats of arms. He is also Captain General of the Royal Company of Archers, the King's Bodyguard for Scotland, about whom we heard yesterday. The current Duke's titles include 2 dukedoms, a marquisate, 4 earldoms, a viscountcy, and 4 lordships, testament to the service rendered to the United Kingdom by his predecessors. To the last family, the one that sent a son to Spain and from which an empress came. I'm sure you will know this family. Accounts of the family suggest early origins in southwest Scotland from as early as the 8th century, but naturally we have no evidence. Family history suggests the family emerged during the reign of King David I of Scotland, who succeeded in 1124. In a pedigree of the Bruces of Clackmannan, Yvonne, son of William, is shown as marrying Euphemia, daughter of Robert the Bruce, Lord of Annandale, great-grandfather of King Robert the Bruce. Charters appear between 1315 and 1321 in the reign of King Robert I, which mention Thomas Kirkpatrick. By 1296, they were influential enough to be required to sign the Ragman Roll, the roll of homage to which I referred earlier. A notable moment in the life of the family came when King Robert the Bruce killed his rival Cumming in a church in Dumfries. When the future king emerged from the church, he said he had killed Cumming, and Sir Roger Kirkpatrick, one of those present, is reported to have said, "I mak sicker, I shall make sure," and went into the church and finished the deed. That has remained the motto of the family ever since, with, for a crest, a hand holding a dagger, as you can see on the right. Closeburn Tower is said to be the oldest inhabited tower in Scotland. The land was apparently given to the Kirkpatricks in 1232 and held until 1783, and then reacquired by another member of the family in 1981. Members of the family married into well-established local families in the southwest. For instance, Duncan, son of Stephen, living at the close of the 13th century, married the heiress of David Torthorwald of Torthorwald and acquired those lands, a barony which was a holding which carried with it certain jurisdictions relating to justice. A Scottish barony, as Pierre Felice explained yesterday, is not a peerage title, and it ran with the land, and thus the title went when the lands were sold. The Kirkpatricks of these times would have known and probably fought with the ancestors of the Scots. Border raids would have been well known to several generations of the Kirkpatrick family. A grandson of William Kirkpatrick of Closeburn, who died in 1686, acquired the lands of Conheath. By his wife Mary, whom he married in the 1750s, he had 19 children, several of whom died, but several of whom accompanied their brother, another William, to Spain. The youngest William was born in 1764 and died in 1837. He settled in Malaga, where he married. He had 3 daughters, the eldest of whom, Doña Maria Manuela, married the second son of the Count of Montijo. William Kirkpatrick is said to have been required to reaffirm to the Count of Montijo that his family was noble in Scotland. He presented a pedigree obtained from Scotland to the king and declared that as his future son-in-law was descended from King Alfonso XI, while the bride-to-be was descended from King Robert the Bruce, they were thus of equally royal descent. Permission for the marriage was given. The secondary title of the Count of Montijo is that of Teba, granted apparently in commemoration of the siege in 1328, at which he was present. The world being a very small place, the then Kirkpatrick of Closeburn was also at that siege, with a party that was hoping to carry the heart of King Robert the Bruce to the Holy Land. History turns up odd connections, for who would have thought that some 6 centuries later, the descendants of 2 of them would marry and produce an empress, Eugenie, granddaughter of William Kirkpatrick of Conheath, Empress of Napoleon. Thus, we have 3 families, all with noble origins and royal descents, and all with a continuing connection to the lands granted to them 7 centuries or more ago. It is a quite remarkable history in modern times. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much. ¿Tenemos alguna pregunta para Elizabeth o algún comentario sobre su ponencia? Muy bien, pues pasamos a la siguiente ponente. ¿Sí?
You said that a female in general can't inherit the titles in Scotland, and you talked about an exception. I can't remember the name. What can you explain about that? Because in Spain, I mean, in short, because it's very, for me, I didn't know that in your country the women could not inherit titles. I didn't know that.
Very few titles descend to and through women. Almost none in England, but quite a considerable number in Scotland. And the destination is to heirs. So if there is only a daughter, they can succeed. And there is at present a move that peerages should be open to descend to all descendants, but with the first child succeeding, regardless of whether they are a boy or a girl. At present, it's normally a son will succeed first, and a daughter will only succeed if there are no brothers. But there is a move that it should become like the crown, which now will descend to the eldest child of the king, regardless, or queen, regardless of their sex. So in Scotland, women can indeed be a peeress in their own right.
Okay, thanks. Thanks.
Muy bien, muchas gracias.